Hello, my name is Javier Chagoyen Lázaro, Chief Financial Officer with the City of Oxnard. This presentation is for the adoption of the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26. Recommendation. Staff recommends that the City Council adopt the following resolutions. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard approving the city operating and capital improvement budget for fiscal year 25-26. B. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard authorizing full-time equivalent positions in the city service effective July 1, 2025, in accordance with the operating budget for fiscal year 25-26. C. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard authorizing classification and salary schedules and approving the attached classification and salary schedule. D. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard establishing financial management policies. E. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard establishing an appropriation limit for fiscal year 25-26. And F. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard adopting a master fee schedule.
There are certain terms that are used through the presentation that are highlighted in this slide, and they are a good reference to better understand how the information is presented for fiscal year 25-26 budget. In this table, we present all fund revenues and expenditures, segregating the major funds and combining all the other funds in a single line item. This table includes proposed revenues, proposed expenditures, and net activity for fiscal year 25-26, as well as the estimated fund balance. Just want to highlight some major changes that were included in this table since the presentation and the public hearing, and all these changes are impacting the line for all other funds. The first one that was mentioned at the public hearing was the additional revenue for gas tax funds in amount approximately of $300,000. Additional expenditures in FCFD District 2000-1 at $1 million for debt service, and additional revenues for special districts of $265,000, and additional expenditures also for special districts approximately of $348,000. For the major funds that are highlighted in this table, we'll have detailed presentations of revenues and expenditures in the subsequent slides. But I want to highlight that the general fund is presenting a balanced budget where revenues are equal to expenditures, and the estimated fund balance at the end of fiscal year 26 is estimated at $54.9 million. For all the other funds, including Measure O and the major enterprise funds, we're seeing a use of fund balance on the fiscal year 25-26. The use of fund balance is going to be used for funding of capital improvement projects. In the case of the wastewater fund, that is the higher use of fund balance, this is going to be funded by an approved state revolving fund loan in the amount of $88.6 million. Overall, revenues for the city are $594 million, and overall expenditures are $661 million, with a projected estimated fund balance as of June 2026 of $165.6 million. These tables represent all funds expenditures for fiscal year 25-26 proposed budget compares with the fiscal year 24-25 adopted budget. For fiscal year 25-26, the proposed expenditures on operating funds are $661 million, a decrease of almost $100 million with respect to the adopted budget of fiscal year 24-25. That decrease is explained by the appropriation in fiscal year 24-25 of the long-term debt payment for unfunded liabilities and for the appropriation for the Rice and Fifth Avenue overpass project. Combined, those two items represent over $150 million. The middle section of the capital funds also funded from operating funds require a separate appropriation. That you can see there's also a decrease of around $101 million that is mostly associated with the appropriation in fiscal year 24-25 of the Rise and Fifth Avenue overpass project. Overall, total city appropriations when you combine operating and capital funds decreased by $200 million. Also in this slide, we can see the budget for the housing authority. That is not a city budget, but we report consolidated with the overall city budget. In this table, we're just presenting a comparison of grant revenue between the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26 and the adopted budget for fiscal year 24-25. We can see there's a decrease of $100 million, and that decrease is also related to the one-time events that it was included in fiscal year 24-25 for the funding of the Rice Avenue and Fifth Street Railroad grade separation projects that is funded through a state grant. That grant was recorded in fiscal year 24-25 and justified the big part of the decrease in grant revenue for fiscal year 25-26. After seeing the consolidated information on the revenue side, now we're going to be seeing in more detail some of the major funds of the city. For fiscal year 25-26, the proposed budget for the general fund revenue is going to be the first one that we're going to start looking into more detail. What we can see in this table is that the overall revenues for the general fund are proposed to be $243.6 million, an increase of $7.9 million over the adopted budget for fiscal year 24-25. The major drivers of that increase are property taxes that are increasing $3.1 million or 4.3%, and sales and use tax that includes Measure E, and the 1% from the Bradley Burns sales tax. Sales tax are going to increase almost $3.5 million, 3.1% in the fiscal year 25-26. Also increasing is miscellaneous income that includes interest that is received for the investments that the city has in different securities. That's offset by some decreases in overall transfers to support the pay for services. Again, overall revenue are projected to increase by 3.4% to $243.6 million for fiscal year 25-26. In this table, we're going to compare the expenditures by departments for fiscal year 25-26 proposed budget with the adopted budget. The revised budget for fiscal year 24-25 is also included in this table for reference. The total expenditures for fiscal year 25-26 proposed budget represent a decrease of almost $13 million compared with the expenditures in the adopted budget for fiscal year 24-25. The driver of that decrease is the pay down of the long-term pension debt that was budgeted in fiscal year 24-25, as well as some reduction on the overall capital projects budget for fiscal year 25-26. Those two items, the pay down of the long-term debt and the capital projects, were budgeted under the non-departmental section of this table. That's the first row. That is the major decrease. The proposed budget for fiscal 25-26 includes all the capital projects under the general fund under the Public Works Department that you can see also shows an increase of almost $1 million for the proposed budget. One difference from this table with the one that was presented at the public hearing is that we have included or segregated the city treasurer proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26. In the public hearing table, that amount was included under the non-departmental section, and here we're just carving out the city treasurer's proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26. The next slide includes the breakdown of the proposed budget for the city treasurer. This table represents the breakdown of the city treasurer proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26 of $400,000. That breakdown includes salary and benefits for the city treasurer, as well as funding for part-time deputy city treasurers, funding for training, supplies, and memberships, and funding for fixed charges and internal services allocation costs that mostly include IT services and funding liabilities and workers' compensation costs, related costs. Now that we have seen the overall revenues and the overall expenditures for the general fund balance, but let's see what is the impact on the bottom line. So fiscal year 24-25 started the fiscal year with 72.7 million in available fund balance, and that includes all this one-time fund available to pay for the long-term pension debt. After we made those payments, the available fund balance at the end of projected fund balance at the end of the fiscal year 24-25 is going to be almost $55 million. For fiscal year 25-26, the revenues and expenditures represent the same amount, so we're expecting no change on the available fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. So that number, it will still remain the same at almost $55 million. The next fund that we're going to be looking with a little bit more detail is going to be the Measure O, or the half a cent sales tax fund. The overall revenue for fiscal year 25-26 is proposed at $19.9 million, with a slight decrease in sales and use tax, and driving the major decrease in revenue is the payment of the general fund loan to the Measure O fund that it was completed in fiscal year 24-25. So that revenue is no longer available in fiscal year 25-26. Therefore, there's a decrease in overall revenue on the Measure O fund of $1.7 million, of almost 8%. On the expenditure side, total expenditures are proposed at $29.2 million, an increase of almost $6.3 million or 27%. So that increase is driven by mostly by one-time projects that would have been funded by the general fund that now are being funded by Measure O. The overall activity for the fund in fiscal year 25-26 is a decrease of $9.3 million. That represents a change of almost $8 million with respect to the prior fiscal year. As a result of expenditures being higher than the revenues, the Measure O fund will see a decrease on the overall fund balance from expected $11.1 million at the end of fiscal year 24-25 to $1.9 million at the end of fiscal year 25-26. This fund balance still provides enough cushion with the future revenue to meet all the obligations for the Measure O fund. We're transitioning now to the enterprise or utility funds, and we're going to start with the water fund revenue and expenses. For fiscal year 25-26, the proposed budget recognized $73.6 million in revenue. That's almost $2.7 million more than the prior fiscal year adopted budget, or 3.8% increase. At the same time, on the overall expenses for this group of funds, it's $75.2 million, a decrease of $6.3 million, or 7.7% with respect to the adopted budget in fiscal year 24-26. The major driver of this reduction is in the transfers out by $7.6 million, and that includes the capital projects that basically that were budgeted in fiscal year 24-25, and for fiscal year 25-26, they're just not, the number of projects is being reduced. We see, on the other hand, an increase in the capital expenditure line for equipment acquisition, that increasing by $1 million. Overall, the net activity for these water funds is a reduction fund balance of $1.6 million with, for the fiscal year. With that reduction net activity that we just saw, the fund balance that is estimated for at the end of fiscal year 25-26 for the water funds is $10.5 million. And that is basically $7.6 million below the reserve target of 25% for the enterprise funds. The next enterprise funds that we're going to be highlighting is the wastewater funds group. Overall revenue for fiscal year 25-26 proposed budget is $45 million, with proposed expenses of $87.5 million for a net activity of a reduction of fund balance of $42.4 million. That represents, in the case of the revenues represent a decrease of almost $50.6 million with respect to the adopted budget in fiscal year 24-25. And that reduction is driven by, because fiscal year 24-25 included under miscellaneous income revenue related to the state revolving fund loan. In the case of the expenditures, we see a decrease of $10.6 million with respect to the adopted budget in fiscal year 24-25. That reduction in the line 59 of transfers out is mostly driven by the projected capital expenditures for fiscal year 25-26 being lower than the one anticipated in fiscal year 24-25. As we mentioned in the previous slide, there's a decrease of almost $42 million on the overall fund activity in the wastewater funds due to the project execution. And that decrease is supported by, we have mentioned this as well, by the state revolving fund loans. So as we receive those funds becomes available to pay for projects. And we're expecting an overall reduction of fund balance from $73.9 million to $31.4 million at the end of fiscal year 25-26. That fund balance represents a reduction or below the City Council approved reserve target of 25% by $4.8 million. The next fund that we're going to discuss is the Environmental Resources Fund, that is in charge of solid waste management in the city. And overall revenues for fiscal year 25-26 are estimated at $68.7 million, and overall expenditures at $69.7 million, with a net activity of a reduction of fund balance of $1 million. When we compare the proposed activity for fiscal year 25-26 with the adopted budget for fiscal year 24-25, revenue represent an increase of $9.5 million, 16%. And that revenue is driven by the rates adopted by City Council. Total expenses and increasing like $6.7 million or 10.6%, and are mostly driven on the transfer out section with the acquisition of equipment for the enterprise, this Environmental Resources Fund. Again, overall, the net activity for the projected for fiscal year 25-26 is a reduction of fund balance by $1 million. As we mentioned, with the reduction of that net activity, the impact on the overall fund balance, it will be a reduction of $1 million. That will bring the fund balance for the estimated $12.5 million at the end of fiscal year 24-25 to an estimated $11.4 million at the end of fiscal year 24-26. That amount is basically $4.6 million below the 25% reserve target that the City Council established through the reserve policy. The next table represents the activity of the Gold Fund with the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26, compare again against the adopted budget for 24-25 and the revised budget for 24-25. Total revenue for fiscal year 25-26 is estimated at $6.9 million, almost $7 million, an increase of $422,000. This revenue is based on the new agreement that the city has signed with the American Golf Corporation to manage the golf course. On total expenses for fiscal year 25-26 represent 6.5 million, a decrease of $768,000 over the adopted budget for fiscal year 24-25. The reduction is mostly driven by the capital projects that were budgeted in fiscal year 24-25. The result of these revenue and expenses is a net activity of increase in fund balance on this for the Golf Fund by almost $500,000. The projected fund balance at the end of fiscal year 24-25 is $5.4 million. And with this additional $500,000 increase that we are projecting for fiscal year 25-26, we'll estimate that the available fund balance at the end of that fiscal year will be $5.9 million for the Golf Fund.
Recommendation. Staff recommends that the City Council adopt the following resolutions. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard approving the city operating and capital improvement budget for fiscal year 25-26. B. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard authorizing full-time equivalent positions in the city service effective July 1, 2025, in accordance with the operating budget for fiscal year 25-26. C. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard authorizing classification and salary schedules and approving the attached classification and salary schedule. D. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard establishing financial management policies. E. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard establishing an appropriation limit for fiscal year 25-26. And F. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Oxnard adopting a master fee schedule.
This concludes the presentation. Thank you.